I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that makes you stop and think about how quickly we judge people and how badly wrong we can be. It was a Thursday morning in late November, the kind that arrives in Sudbury, Ontario, like a punishment. The temperature had dropped to -19 overnight, and the sky was the color of old concrete. The kind of morning where most people are already irritable before they've even had their first coffee. The hospital parking lot at Health Sciences North was half empty at 6:47 a.m. The morning shift hadn't fully arrived yet. A few nurses walked quickly from their cars, heads down into the wind, and standing near the entrance, beside a battered blue pickup truck with a cracked windshield and a busted rear bumper, was a boy. He looked about 14, maybe 15, tall for his age, with the kind of lean that comes not from fitness but from not eating enough. He had dark brown skin and close-cropped hair, and he was wearing a thin gray hoodie, unzipped, over a plain white t-shirt, as if the cold simply hadn't occurred to him. His jeans had a tear across the left knee. His sneakers were the kind you find on clearance racks in September. He was holding a small paper bag from Tim Hortons in one hand. Nothing else. His name was Tobias Mensah, 15 years old, son of a Ghanaian-born electrician who had come to Sudbury in 2004 chasing the mining boom and never left. Tobias had his father's wide-set eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw. His mother, who had passed from ovarian cancer 3 years earlier, in this very hospital, in a room on the 4th floor that Tobias could not look at whenever he visited. He had been coming here every Thursday morning since September, not for himself. For his grandmother, Abina, who was receiving chemotherapy at 7 a.m. every week and who refused to let his father take time off work to drive her. So Tobias did it, every Thursday, before school. Alarm at 5:30. Walk to the bus stop in the dark. Tim Hortons for Abina's tea with 2 sugars and a plain bagel, because the chemo made her nauseous, and the bagel was the only thing that stayed down. Then the hospital, then the bus back to school, arriving halfway through first period, still smelling like antiseptic and morning cold. He never complained about it, not once. That morning, Tobias was standing by the truck, not his truck, his grandmother's neighbor had lent them it, waiting for Abina to finish checking in at reception so he could bring her the tea before it went cold. He was looking at his phone, not bothering anyone. That's when Harriet Collingwood walked past him. Harriet Collingwood was 53 years old, the director of community programs at the hospital, a position she had held for 11 years and wore like a piece of jewelry. She was a small woman with sharp blue eyes and the kind of posture that people use when they want to take up more space than they physically occupy. She wore a wool coat from a boutique in downtown Sudbury, carried a leather tote bag, and had the expression of someone who had decided a long time ago that they were more observant than most people. She glanced at Tobias, then she stopped. She looked at the cracked truck, then back at him, the torn jeans. The hoodie in -19, the Tim Hortons bag. She made a calculation in about 4 seconds that she'd been making her whole life, and she reached a conclusion. She walked to the entrance, spoke to the security guard just inside the glass doors, a heavy-set man named Dell who had worked mornings here for 6 years, and she said quietly but not quietly enough, "There's a young man loitering by the accessible parking. I'm not sure he belongs here." Dale looked up, looked through the glass, looked at Tobias, who was still on his phone, still holding the paper bag. Dale, to his credit, hesitated. "He's been here before," he said. "Few times. Think he comes with his grandmother." Harriet Collingwood pursed her lips. "Just keep an eye on him." She walked on toward the elevators. Dale came outside. He was a decent man who was also, in that moment, in an impossible position, being watched by his superior through the glass, asked to do something he already didn't feel good about. He walked up to Tobias and said, not unkindly, "Hey, son, can I ask what you're doing out here?" Tobias looked up from his phone. He looked at Dale. He did not get angry. He did not get defensive. He just said calmly, "Waiting for my grandmother. She's checking in for chemo." "Fordsees, her name is Abena Okafor Mensah. You can check." Dale nodded slowly. Okay. You might want to wait inside though, yeah? It's cold. I'm good, Tobias said. She likes the fresh air after. Dale went back inside, but Harriet Collingwood wasn't finished. She came back 20 minutes later, this time with a younger administrator named Paul Tretiak, who was new and nervous and visibly uncomfortable with what he was being asked to do. Harriet had apparently decided that Dale's response had been insufficient. This time, she came outside herself. Excuse me, she said, standing in front of Tobias with her leather tote pulled close to her side. Tobias looked up. This is a hospital entrance. We have a policy about loitering in accessible areas. I'm going to need to ask you to either come inside and state your purpose or— My grandmother is Abina Okafor Mensah, Tobias said again, same tone. Flat, unhurried, giving away nothing. Ward C chemo. Every Thursday at 7. I drive her. I'm waiting for her. Harriet glanced at the cracked truck. You drive? A pause. I have a learner's permit, Tobias said. My father's supervisor drove us this week. He's at the Tim Hortons around the corner. Harriet looked at him for a long moment, and you could see something working behind her eyes. The faint awareness, maybe, that she had stepped somewhere she shouldn't have. But she had a way of pressing forward when she should have stopped. I'm going to need to verify that, she said. Can you come inside? Tobias looked at the Tim Hortons bag in his hand. The tea was getting cold. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Sure. He followed her inside. Paul Tretiak looked at the floor the whole way. At the front desk, Harriet asked the receptionist to confirm whether an Abina Okafor Mensah was registered that morning. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s named Greta, who had seen 17 years of front desk at this hospital, looked at her screen, looked at Tobias and said, Yes, checked in at 6:51. She's in Ward C right now. Harriet said nothing. Tobias said nothing either. He just turned and walked toward Ward C. He found his grandmother in the chair by the window, the one she always chose because she said the light reminded her of Accra. Abina Okafor Mensah was 67, small and fine-boned, wearing the yellow headscarf Tobias's mother had given her years before. She was thin from the treatment, but when she saw Tobias come through the door, she smiled the way grandmothers smile, all the way up. You remembered 2 sugars? She said. Always, he said. He sat with her for the full 45 minutes, holding the paper cup while she drank, making sure the bagel stayed warm under the wrapper. They talked about small things, a show she'd been watching, a song he'd heard on the bus, whether the truck's heater had worked any better this week. When the chemo was running and she drifted toward sleep, he did homework on his phone. When she woke, he was there. He always was. What Tobias had not mentioned to Harriet Collingwood, or to Dale, or to Paul Tretiak, was something he didn't think was relevant. His father, Emmanuel Okafor Mensah, was not just a working electrician in Sudbury. He was the founder and principal shareholder of Okafor Electrical and Industrial Services, a company that had started in 2007 with 1 van and 2 employees, and had grown, quietly and without fanfare, into one of the largest electrical contractors in northern Ontario. They had done work on 3 hospitals, 2 transit stations, a federal government building in Ottawa, and, as of this past spring, a major expansion at Health Sciences North itself, the hospital's new East Wing. Emmanuel was, by any reasonable measure, a significant donor and contractor for this institution. He had a plaque on the wall in the new wing, though he'd asked them to keep it small. He was the kind of man who gave money to things and then didn't want anyone to make a fuss about it. And Tobias was his son. The same son who woke at 5:30 every Thursday. The same son who took the bus. The same son who stood in -19 in a hoodie because he hadn't thought to grab his coat in the dark of the morning. The same son who said, Sure, I'll come inside, and followed a woman who had already decided what he was, into a building his father had helped build. None of that came out that Thursday. It came out the following Monday. It came out because of Dr. Raymond Ashby Wolfe. Dr. Raymond Ashby Wolfe was the hospital's chief of oncology, 61 years old, tall, silver-haired, with the easy authority of a man who had delivered both very good news and very bad news over 40 years, and had learned that the most important thing in either case was to look the patient in the eye. He had been Abina's oncologist since the beginning. He knew who she was. He knew who her family was. On Monday morning, Raymond had a standing meeting with Harriet Collingwood about the hospital's community outreach calendar. They were 15 minutes in when Harriet mentioned, casually, an incident near the accessible entrance the previous Thursday. A young man she'd had to have escorted inside for a verification check. She said it the way people say things when they have already half convinced themselves they were justified. Raymond put his pen down. "Describe him," he said. Harriet did. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Was his grandmother a patient here? A pause. Yes. It turned out. Was he doing anything wrong? Another pause, longer this time. He was loitering near Harriet. Raymond's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That boy comes here every Thursday at 6:45 a.m. to bring his grandmother tea before her chemo. I have spoken with him. He is a 15-year-old who gets up before sunrise every week to make sure his grandmother doesn't face treatment alone. His mother died in this hospital. In Ward D 3 years ago. He knows this building better than most of our staff. The room was very quiet. And, Raymond said, still quiet, his father built the East Wing. Harriet Collingwood set her coffee down. Raymond picked up his pen, but he didn't write anything. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm going to ask you to do something this week. I'd like you to think about what information you had and what conclusion you drew from it, and whether those two things were actually connected. I think that conversation is worth having." He paused. "With yourself first." He left the meeting 10 minutes later than planned. That afternoon, a letter went to Emmanuel Okafor-Mensah from the hospital's administration. Not from Raymond, who hadn't asked for that, but from the board chair, who had heard from Raymond and made some calls. The letter acknowledged that a procedural misstep had occurred involving Emmanuel's son, expressed the hospital's regret, and committed to a review of entrance and security procedures with an equity lens. Emmanuel read the letter at his desk, then set it down, then called Tobias. "You didn't tell me," he said. "It wasn't a big deal," Tobias said. "Tobias." A pause. "Dad. She was just a person who made a decision too fast. It happens. I didn't do anything wrong, and Grandma got her tea, and I made it to school in time for second period." Another pause. "I don't need a letter." Emmanuel was quiet for a moment. "You're a better man than me," he said finally. "Grandma raised you," Tobias said, "and she raised me, so." Emmanuel laughed, short, surprised. The kind of laugh that's really something else wearing a laugh's clothes. What happened next unfolded over several weeks, not in a dramatic scene, but in the quiet, incremental way that real change usually happens. Harriet Collingwood requested a meeting with Raymond on her own, with no agenda sent in advance. What was said in that room, no one fully knows, but Harriet submitted a proposal the following month for new frontline training on what she called assumption-based interventions, which was a careful way of describing what had happened to Tobias. The proposal was approved. The training was built. It now runs twice a year. She didn't announce that it was because of him, but Raymond knew. Greta at the front desk knew. Dale, who had felt bad about the whole thing since the moment it happened, knew. And on the Thursday after the letter, when Tobias arrived at 6:47 with Abina's tea, Dale held the door open for him and said, "Morning, Tobias. She's already checked in." Ward C. Tobias looked at him, nodded once. "Thanks, Dale." He walked in out of the cold, paper bag in hand, heading to the window chair where his grandmother would be waiting for the light that reminded her of home. He never mentioned the incident to Abina. She had enough to deal with. And honestly, and I say this directly to you because this is the part I want you to sit with, that's the thing that gets me most about this story. Not the vindication, not the letter, not even the training program. It's that a 15-year-old boy who had every reason to be angry chose not to carry it, chose to protect his grandmother from one more hard thing, chose, over and over, to show up, not to prove something to anyone, but because someone needed tea, and he was the one who could bring it. We talk a lot about quiet strength. We use the phrase, and then we imagine it in adults, in people with resources, in people who've had time to develop it. We don't often imagine it in a kid in a torn hoodie at -19, who says sure when he should probably say something much sharper. Tobias Okafor didn't need a letter, didn't need an apology, didn't need anyone to find out who his father was. He needed a door held open, and eventually he got that too. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you know, or something you've seen, or a moment where you made a fast judgment and then had to live with it, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, have you ever been in Tobias's position? Have you ever been in Harriet's? Both answers are welcome here. That's what this space is for. If this is your first time on Dell Stories, welcome. We tell stories like this one, real, human, complicated, every week. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this one moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is hold the door open for someone who's already been standing in the cold long enough.